Tēnā tātou katoa, Josie Scott, rawa Ann Somerville, tēnā kōrua koutou. Whakatau mai ki runga ki he Kete rau Mahara o te rā. When I was thinking of a whakatau that I wanted to just lay forward this morning to set the tone of what this was about for me, and reflecting, kia whakatō muri te haere whakamoa. I walk backwards into the future, and that's what I feel like this conversation will be about this morning.
Shall I start, Anne?
Yeah, you do that.
Okay, so starting at the top here of Martaia Fair Street, there was a garage, and that garage was an engineering garage, and the guy who owned it was called Harold Pugh, P-U-G-H. There's at the front here. And Harold was a very stern guy. We never mixed with him because he had that look of a Pākehā man who knew what he was doing, and we wouldn't touch anything on his section. But he had an engineering shop there, and all the outside of his property was old machinery and things that he was working on. As I say, a very stern man, so he never crossed his path. We always said good morning, and because being kids, they'd say Mr. Pug, because that was his name, and we all say, no, it's Pugh. But anyway, Mr. Pugh lived there. And then next door was an empty section, which was later bought and built on by Judd Davey. So he bought that property off Ngā Huia Rana. And in the early days, before he actually, Juddy built there, that was our playing section. And we used to go down there and light a little fire and make toffee. So every now and then when we had nothing else on, the kids we'd nominate who bought what. You bring the frying pan, you bring the butter, and you bring the sugar. So we'd go down there, and I had to bring the matches sometimes because my father smoked. And so we go down and light a fire, and we'd put the pan there, hi Geeks, and make toffee. Now we had no ingredients that matched anything, but we still created toffee. So the butter that was bought went in the pan, the sugar that was bought went in the pan, we stirred it, then we ran down to the lake and set the pan in the lake to set our toffee. So we'd set about then eating the toffee. But then it would take a couple of weeks before we could do that because our mothers would realise that some of her stores were disappearing. So that's when, and Juddy was also the skipper of the Wainona and the Ngāroto, the boats there, and his family have spread right across now into the engineering area. So they bought that property as well. Coming down from there we had, and Mr. Mutu asked me this morning about the Wharerahi family. That's where we had Freak and Wehi. Yeah, and so they had a large family, Dora, Philip, no, I'm talking about the wrong family, Wharerahis. Okay, so I might have written it down here because my mind was a jumble yesterday. So the Wharerahi family, it was Freak, it was Johnny Rock, and Amo, Kat, her name was Martha, the holder of a beautiful voice. And I don't know why we called her Cat or Pussycat. But we had all nicknames for each other when we were down there. So they lived there until the new Māori Affairs homes came up on Kete Road. So they were relocated on Kete Road, but they came back when the youth club started, the children. And then next to there we had Elsie and Keith Takuri built on that property when they moved, and they had their children there. And Elsie was the daughter of Awatere, the army, yeah, from the Second World War. Yeah. Yes, the one that. Yeah. So and then they lived there. Then we went next door to Ty Tate's new home, but he lived previously up, and I'll show you where he lived before, up Kiharoa Street, up Korokai Street. And but we haven't got there yet. Yeah. See, this is what I mean. This is what I'm jumping around because things are flooding my head as I relate people's names, and I'm very aware that some of their children and grandchildren and everything else are sitting here in the audience. I want to say their names because they're never heard any other time, and because they weren't chiefs, they were Indians. But they were there when I was a child, and they added to my life, and their children added to my life as well. So we've Theo Tate and Kete moved into the brand new house that was down there, and it's still there, and the Tates still occupy it. And you would know Theo was the husband of Merepeka, Rotorua Tate. So Theo, you know, his life started down there as well. And they had lots of children, and those children and their children are still living down there in that house. Next door to that was where Lily Huka and Rangi Huka Amoho lived, and that's where Dora comes in. So they had a huge family of Amoho children, all gifted with the voice. They could all sing, they could dance. They were a very, very talented family. And as we know, Emily, very, very talented family. But they also relocated out to Kotu. So we were losing people over the years, but there was never an empty house in Ōhinemutu. When it was empty, it was occupied again immediately of the same family. So after Lily and them left, Betty and them left, the old karawa who actually owned the house, Puruma, Wikirefi, and his wife Mere came back for a while, and I'm talking about Geko's family now. And then they had a place over at Maketu, so they spent their time between. Leslie. Sorry, people. See? Geko, Leslie. How did we get these different names? So this is Leslie here. I'm talking about Leslie's family. And so Puruma used to go over to Maketu a lot. And then in the meantime, who moved in there but Leslie's parents, Millie and Darky Douglas, and their family. So that's where Geko, where I got to meet Geko, because they were little babies there. Her older brother, Ty, was, were you born there, kids? I mean, Leslie? Yeah. But a family home, and when you look at these homes, those ones had 2 rooms. So they had a bedroom and a kitchen. No running water, cold tap at the back, but the lake was right up behind them. So tragically, and I'm going to say this because I want them remembered too, Gex, Darky and Ty were tragically killed in an accident coming back here to Rotorua from the Matahina Dam. And at that time, I was just going out with Willie, and he worked with both of them. So yeah, a lot of tragedies happened down at Ōhinemutu, a lot of happiness, lots of everything that's happening today happened down there when we were children, but we were close to everything. So I don't think any of us needed to have.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Josie, but it would be really great if I could pass you our contemporary narco.
Anne will be happy now because she's been wanting a pointer, she's been wanting everything else. I said, don't worry about it, Anne. Anyway, but we haven't got to the end. We'll go right down towards the church. So then we had Betty Brooks came back and lived in the house when they moved. And then, but even when she had vacated the house for a while when she went to Australia, Natalie's grandmother and grandfather moved into the house. So Maxine and Hickle Richards moved into that house, and they had 2 of their children there. I think when they left, Maxine was happy with John, but they had Natalie's dad and Muggy, Mary. So, and at that time, Willie and I were close to getting married, and he was out of accommodation, so he stayed down there with them too for a little while. So, open door policy down at Ōhinemutu. Everybody had a place to live and a place to sleep, a place to eat kai. And that's what it was like. That's what I grew up with. We could go to any house down there and be welcomed. If they were eating, welcome to sit around the table. And it was around the table. It wasn't watching TV with it on your lap or anything. You had to sit down and you had to sit with the older people of the house and eat your kai there and watch your P's and Q's how you ate. But that was another lovely home. And then next door to that we had Tamatama. The original Tamatama was there. They say it belonged to the Bennett family. I think it was gifted to the Bennett family along the way, but then that became, oh, thank you, yep, that's it there. Thank you, Ann. Oh, good girl. and Tamatama had a very colourful history as well. That was the church hall, of course, as I say. What happened before it became the church hall, I don't know, because it was quite an old building when we were kids. Oh, that's right, it was the carving. Thank you, Ann. It was the carving school. Yeah, prior to that. But then they moved out to Whitaker Road, yeah, and then out to the arts and crafts. Yeah, so in behind the Tamatama was a little room where you could have tea and coffee, or tea mainly in those days, and prepare kai. And my brother Ambo and his wife Honey, Timiho, moved into there, and they had about 4 children in that one space, but then they put a petition across to create a bedroom. So you just walked in the door and there were beds everywhere. But then you walked into the door from their bedroom into Tamatama. And that's where we had our practices. St. Faith's Club started there. So can you imagine a mother bringing up children with about 20 or 30 young kids running around Tamatama, making a heck of a noise twice a week, and her trying to look after her little babies in the back. But that's what we did. That was life then. She'd come in and complain, and Uncle Happy would say, yeah, quieten down, children. But it didn't go very far. So Tamatama was a very, very well used, and they also played table tennis in there. So they had a table tennis club. Then the St. Faith's Women's Fellowship moved in there as well. So they beamed out of Tamatama. So that's why they were responsible for building the new Tamatama alongside the church. So those women, Auntie Baby Hayward, Baby Inez Kingy, and Rona Larson and Bub Brell, they were all part of the Women's Fellowship. And then what's her name, Mitchell? Chadwick. What was Auntie? Maddie Bird, yeah. So Maddie Bird was responsible for that. So through those women who started their little league in Tamatama, we ended up getting the new Tamatama. And when they dismantled the building itself, because they were building the new whakatūria, they removed some of the carvings in there, and they are now housed in the new Tamatama next to the church. So we go from there, and then the new public toilets. So this is how everybody could live in the little houses that they had, because there were public toilets everywhere. And there was a cluster of about 4 ladies' toilets and 4 men's toilets right next to Tamatama. So anybody living in the village could manage in one room, because they could use the toilets and anything else like that. And we didn't have to worry about bathing, because we had communal baths all over the place. And so next to the public toilets we had Uncle Lofty. What was Lofty's other name? Haupapa. Uncle Lofty Haupapa. So he lived there with his wife Mariah, and they had a son called Paratini. And he's still around now. He's with a lot of disease, because he's got crutches, and he's not very well at all. He's moved out to Ngātaha, but he was born there and raised there before he went off to the abattoirs or something down in Wellington as a young boy. But Paratini is still around. He still comes to our hui. He still has very valuable information to pass onto the trusts that operate down there. So, and then next door to them was the Weber house. Quia Wiki Weber lived there. And then when she moved out to Kotu, Tangi Weber and Piki McGarvey moved in there. And they had plenty of children as well. I think their first lot of children were twins, the twin boys, Kani and Tai. And Tai, I think, is still alive. And so, you know, we've kept in touch over the years, but this is where they were born. Next to that house was the Taniwha bath. And so that was the communal bath down there. So everybody in that little vicinity used the Taniwha bath. And then on the other side of the fence, the bath next to that was the Mitchell bath. So they ran in tandem, but there was a fence across it because that was Sambo's property. And but we had baths there, and I hadn't long been going with Willie, and he came down one night from Marahina and he said, I've got to have a bath. I said, well, go down the Taniwha bath, I can't see anybody in there at the moment. So in he goes, and who comes along there after he's got in the bath but the Penny girls? Wena, Hai, Dara and Georgie. And poor old Willie didn't know what to do. He's emerged in the bath, too scared to get up and have a wash and everything else. The girls latched onto that immediately, and they stayed in the bath longer than what they were doing, until this little red lobster gets out of the bath to get dried. And they've never forgotten that story. And we still retell that story, and Willie said, I'll never go to that bath again in my whole life. Yeah, that was the bath there, the Taniwha bath. Then next to that was a whare that Kuia Simeon lived in. And she had a moko, and when I was a child, she only ever sat in the front of the whare. So that's the only space I would see. I've never went into her house, but she was a watchdog for the children. So if anything happened, we'd run to Kuia Bella. And if we burned ourselves anywhere, she'd put butter on it. And of course, straight away the blisters would come up. And then we'd have to go up to the hospital to get the blisters broken and plasters put on. But we always went to Kuia Bella. She was a gorgeous old lady. And then her whare became the carving shop for Kima, Hakaraya. So he ran his carving shop out of there. And over the years, you don't know what happens when they disappear because you're not interested in that, or how they were pulled down and why they were pulled down or anything like that. But you know, new things appear, so you just accept what's taking its place. And then, of course, we had the Mitchell homestead next door, where we had Hamu and Auntie Rangi, and they had a whole lot of children there. Ryu being one of them, and because Hamu was a pango. And a very prized home in the village because everybody was going to and fro getting as much history that they could from Hamu. And his children sadly didn't grow up with that knowledge. They stayed away, well, the boys especially, but the girls were good, Ryu and Kete. And they adopted another daughter out Media, and she went down to their auntie down in Wellington. I can't think of her name at the moment, but Stuart Harris's mum. Yeah, so she went down to Hamu's sister. So Otaki. Thank you, Gex. Yeah, so but her husband worked in Wellington, so they were in Wellington for a few years, and that's where Stuart and them all grew up. So they were very politically wise down there, those children growing up. And then, of course, next door was the church. So coming from the church, I'll start back down here to the top of Mātai Fair. Down here, right down here by the St. Michael's Green, Ann? Yep, okay. So hard up, and that must be the little hut, a little house. That little property there, when I was a child, was lived in by a kuia, and she was Roger Solomon's grandmother. And Roger was there as a child. I don't know how old he was, but he was Maxine's age, my sister's age, and they all spent a lot of time together because although we were the same generation, just a few years you had a different level of who you were with and who you grew up with and who you played with. You know, they went past the playing age and they were doing other things. So Roger was very close with Maxine, and we would go past and pick him up to go to school. But that old queer was unbelievable because the only time we ever saw her was when she was out the front with a Manuka broom cleaning her dirt path. So everything on that dirt path had to be, you know, in order. So she would just go like this every morning as we walk past to pick Roger up to go to school. I didn't know much about that kuia, but that's where she lived, and I think that's her little whare that's hard up against here, the St. Michael's fence. Next door to that we had the Pene family. Who lived there first, I don't know, but that's where Johnny and Mate Pene lived, Matty Pene. And Matty was Bishop Kingi's older sister, one of the Bishop Kingi's older sisters, and that's where those horrible 4 sisters came from. And they were my good mates, and when and I still good mates. Hi, we don't see Hi often now because she has the early stages of dementia, but she's looked after by her daughter in Bennett Road. But Hi pops up every now and then, and as soon as she walks into the room, she goes, Mokai! And everybody, oh, here's Hi. And that Mokai Marituna is my mighty name, so that's all she's ever called me, is Mokai. So should really go and visit her sometimes, but you never know how Mawiwi people are. You know, it's like Kat's mum, Maureen. Very hard to pick a time to visit as well. So we always ask what she's doing, what's happening, and send our love to her. I email her. I must do that and catch her up on what's happening as well. So the Pene girls lived there, and they had the most beautiful plum tree. Now the Kingi family were the only people who passed this special plum around. And you knew it was a Kingi household because this plum tree grew there. And we always tried to get the stone and try and grow fruit from the stone. It never worked. But it was the most beautiful plum, big red plum and red inside. And we would never steal plums from there because Johnny Penny would chase us and kick our bums. So we had to hang around the girls to pick more plums and hand them to us. So we always had a bag of plums to take to school, which we all shared. And because Johnny Penny is famous for being so young when he went off to the Second World War. I think he was only 14 when he enlisted. And you know, how can you imagine a person that young going off to war and then coming back and having 4 daughters and marrying a lovely woman? Auntie Mattie was a beautiful, beautiful woman, like all of the Kingi people were, Kingi family were. So coming down from there, and of course Wena's children live in there now, and her grandchildren and her great-great-grandchildren live there. They built a garage to take the overflow, but they still occupy the house. All of these houses have been occupied by people of the family. They don't move out of the family.
That's a question. That's a question I sometimes get asked, that these houses have stayed in the families.
Yes, except the Keith and Elsie Takiri's place was sold by their son, and it's become a Airbnb. But we have no contact with any of them, and I think they're Chinese owners, which is a shame. You know, if we had got our act together while it was all happening, but you never know when houses are going up for sale. There was never a big for sale sign up there, and it was sold to Chinese, and they're no trouble in the par, but it could have been a home that housed more of the family. You know, that's all we look at, the properties that are there, and keeping the households going, and you know, remembering what's going on. So next door to the Penes was an empty section. We never played in there because we were told that Kehua lived in there, and you just don't go anywhere near there. But you realise as you get older why we were told not to play in there. There was active ngafa in there, and it was all overgrown, so they didn't want us running in there because you couldn't see the dangers that you might have been running through. So there are a lot of spots like that in Ōhinemutu when we were children, so we listened. In those days we listened, and none of us wanted to get burnt any more than we already were getting burnt on our feet and everything else when we fell over. You never learn a lesson when we were that age. So then next door to that was Auntie Meritini. And Meritini was a very special lady to us, a very dominant lady. And you would remember her children. We had Gus Cleo and Eunice. Eunice Jenkins, Judy Skelly, and Evelyn, and then Eric Jenkins. Eric was my age. Can you remember Eric at school, Carol? Eric Jenkins, yeah. Eric and I were about a month apart in age, so we were brought up like brother and sister, like we thought we were brother and sister because we spent so much time together. That's what I mean, the relationships were close.
There was a house before Meditini, and that was my grandmother's sister. Rotorua had a little whare there, and she always had lace curtains. She passed away there.
I can't remember that house at all. All I know is the empty section, and then, So that wasn't there when I grew up. It was just Meditini's house, but that big section was there. So that would have been her section, and that was where.
She poisoned herself over a man,
Oh,
and
really?
Mum went across, and they raised it to the ground. So Mum found her auntie, and my grandmother's sister. There was only two of them by Ōhinemutu.
Well, there you go. That's something that I didn't know. Thank you for that, Gigs. And then the household, and that was on the corner. So we're now turning the corner from Mātaia Fair Street. And then we're going around the corner. Meditini's is the one on the corner, number 3 there that you can see. Yep. And we'll come back up this way. So from, look, I wrote this all down. I can barely even understand what I wrote. So, but coming back from there, we came up to a hard case house. It was, I don't know how they lived in it because the piles had gone and the floor was like this. And that's where Mosey and Naughty Tuffy lived. And we couldn't believe that people lived in a house like that. But they managed, and that's where Muffet, Bill, Ōhinemutu, Muffet and Janet, is it Janet? Helen were born. And they were lovely, lovely friends, lovely, Helen especially, but she died quite young. So once we became teenagers and got married, and Helen disappeared, and it wasn't long before she was brought back to the pa for her tangi. But lovely house, and these houses seemed to be attached then because close up to it was where Tai Tate lived before he built the house down the bottom. And it was in a whare called Pukaki. And it had painted maihi. And he lived in there. It was just one room. And then when he moved down into his new house, my brother Bumble and Auntie Sue moved in there with 2 children, with Shane and Chloe. So they lived there until they built their house at Ian Street in Kete. So as I say, houses never lasted. They weren't empty. You know, one family would go and then the next family would come straight in. But next to that was a house that I know was there, but I don't know why it was built there or why, because it was more modern than the Pukaki house, and it had carvings on it because the front of the house looked towards Lake Road, and you drove down the entry and then went into the front door. And as I grew up, that was the club room for the Notaha Rugby League. So Aroha Wilson lived in there when I was a young girl, but then it was the club rooms for the Notaha Rugby League. So whatever happened to that house, I don't know, but that's where the Uluawes live now. They built their home there. So, and then we come across the road, the top of Kiharua, to the Murray's property. So,
Is here Josie?
at the top, right at the top
Right
here.
at the top?
No, this come up.
I'm lost here.
Oh no, korowai, sorry Ann, no wonder you're lost, because I was leading you the wrong way. So we come up here, and then that's where I think the club rooms were, because it was just a couple of sections away from St Michael's Church. Then here we had the property that Willie and I have bought 20 years ago, and that was the property belonging to the Potaka family and the Anaru family. So they shared that property. And from going up Korowai Street, there was a big flight of stairs. And but it was only one floor, because the main floor came straight off Lake Road. But underneath, the side that we could see was probably a lot of storage and things like that. So to get up there from the back, you went up these flights of stairs. And we've since built on their property, but that burned down many years ago, and it was an empty section for many years. And we bought it, Ata Portaka owned it, and she sold it to Mike Romaines, who then on-sold it to Willie and I. And when Mike offered it to Willie, and he comes back and says, "Do you want to buy that property?" I said, "No, I'm happy in Randolph Street." And he said, "But Mike's offering it to us before he puts it on the market." I said, "I don't want to go live back in the park." And he said, "Well, I do." I said, "Well, you never told me that before. You keep asking me." So we bought the property, and Willie built the house that we live in now. So thank you for taking me home. So, and then going across the road from there, it was the Murray property. It was a huge property at the top of Korowai Street. And in those days, Walter Murray and Ethel Murray lived in there, and it was always an enigma to me how a woman so English, so pale, so white powdered, so lipsticked, lived in amongst us all down there. And she had a big family. But yeah, and the boys were rough and ready boys. They were, yeah. Well, you know Trevor Murray, who married Elsie, Trevor. Yeah, so you know what Trevor was like. All the boys were exactly the same. Bill was a school teacher, and so they had some refined children in amongst that lot, but they were hunter-gatherers, and that's how they lived their lives. And they had a trucking firm of sorts, or a transport. So you drove down where those 3 flats are now, was their property, and you drove down into the sheds where they parked their trucks, and they had horses as well. So the boys used to hunt with their horses. And I wonder now, how did they all fit in that little bit of property? How did they fit in? But Ethel, I don't know how they met, but she had all these big strapping lads who went out hunting on horses and everything else. And whenever I went to go up and see Desiree and Diane, can you remember them? Carol? Desiree and Diane Murray? We were allowed to go to the house, but they had a pianola, and all the shades were drawn, because she was still very English and didn't want the sun to come into the house. And we couldn't believe it. That it was a totally different home, just so well maintained, with all of this beautiful furniture around and soft furnishings around, and it was like stepping into an English world. But if you stepped into the kitchen and saw the boys in the kitchen and the dining room, you thought, wow, you stepped over the threshold. Because I think the lounge area was Ethel's domain. But we would go in there sometimes and be allowed to play the pianola. But as I say, it was a totally different world. So, but I grew up with Diane and Desiree. And they had Dottie, I think, Daphne was the oldest girl. Anyway, that was the Murray family, and John Murray, the lawyer, now lives there. And yeah, so coming down from that house was the Manahi homestead. So that's where Hiwaroa and Lola lived, and another mixed marriage. So Lola, I think, came from Tonga. You would,
yeah, Māori and Tonga. Tongan dad.
Yeah, Tongan. And but heritage, I'm saying that the mixed heritage that was around when I was a young girl, but it was of no consequence. They lived in the pa, and they lived like how we lived, and we just admired the ones that were there, and we were puzzled at the ones that still led their lives, you know, there like Ethel Murray, but they were us, and everybody else was us. And of course Hera was there with Lola, and that's where that's where Queer resided, Lady Queer Morrison and Howard Morrison, Sir Howard. And Donna's in the house now. Emily was a frequent visitor down there when Queer moved back. And yeah, she was there with Queer the rest of her life, even when she went out to the home. So Emily has an attachment there with Queer. And then we come back down into Tama. So turning around the side of Tama. Yep. We've got the homestead that I grew up in, that I was born in. And that's a Timiho Te Korowai homestead. And Natalie's homestead as well. And so we live right next door to Tama. Korowai. Down near the bottom. Oh no, it's here, sorry. And I'm so confused. Yeah, I would have been all right without the pointer and the map. I could have just talked about it. But however, so coming around there, and I was born in that house. My mother was whare pauaka, and I could talk an hour about my life, but I want to talk about everybody else. Because the consequence of my birth and everything else, how I came to the family, because it was our family land. My Kroa lived there, and then gave some of the land, plus other shares, to build Tama. And so he was leased his own land back, because we had multiple shares down there, and they're still there. The multiple shares are still there. So he was living there, and then Ratama married Florence, who came out from Scotland, and my mother lived there because that was her family home as well. And my mother was single. She had me when she was 26, still single, and when I was taken back to the house, I was whāngai by Ratama and Flo. So when she left to carry on her life, I stayed. So I was brought up like Maxine's sister. They had 7 children, and then I was the addition. But I came at the right time because they had young Wayne boy after me, and I was his babysitter. I was his guardian for the rest of my life. And as you well know, Geeks, and so wherever I went, I had to take him. But however, I had a wonderful, wonderful life down there, and they're my mother and father as far as I'm concerned, and Natalie's grandmother's my sister. So, you know, that's when you're whāngai for life. And I lived most of my life there. My mother built a batch down by the Ōhinemutu River by concerned brother and uncles and cousins and everything else, trying to get her to stabilise her life. And so they gifted me back to her, but I can tell you I didn't last very long. I was straight back to my home. And but always grew up with my mother, knew what was going on, she knew what was going on with me, and that everything was exposed. There were no secrets to us, and it was the secrets we were talking about yesterday down at the Tangi. But you know, everything was out in the open. So, but still people who don't know where I fit into the family, because they've come along after. And I'm not about to be explaining my life to everybody, because I'm the sister. I'm the daughter of Flo and Ambo. And he was the sanitation inspector for the Māori villages. So he had a truck from the Borough Council. So we were, you know, we had transport wherever we wanted to go, because Pop could use his truck without any problems at all. And he'd go out to Waka, clean the toilets out there, or he got past the cleaning stage, he'd inspect the toilets. So he had people under him by this stage. And all of the Māori villages that had public toilets. So we had 2 toilets at our house, one we used, and one that was there for Tama, but was never hooked up, because they had the other public toilets down the side, and also over by Whakaturia. So that spare toilet was full of toilet rolls. So our family never ran out of toilet rolls. If anybody wanted toilet rolls, they'd come and knock on, Amber, you got a toilet roll? Yep, just go and help yourself out there. So I apologise, County Council, you must have gone through hundreds of toilet rolls when my father was the sanitary inspector, sanitation inspector. Yeah, so, but you know, that's, if you had anything, you gave it away if anybody needed it, no matter who paid for it. So thank you, Council. But and then coming back up Kiharoa Street, there was a playground next to us where Natalie's grandmother built, where Maxine built her first whare. That was a playground. So we had a set of swings there and a seesaw. I'm not even going to get through these villages, but I think you should know the people that were there. It's important to me because they're never spoken about anymore. And so we had the swings there. Then next door to that, there was a shop, and that shop that seen a lot of shopkeepers going through there. But that property was owned by the Manahi family. And so we had Mela going through there, Mela Tawa, she had her children there, and then an Indian family turned up. We knew nothing about Ranshaw or Kunva, his wife. We found out years later that they brought 2 children with them. As far as we were concerned, Kanta and Lakshmi were blood sisters, but we found out later that they weren't. That Ranshaw and Kunva had to flee India because they were widow and widower, and they had a child each, and they weren't allowed to marry. So they had to flee India, and they came out here. How they got down to the shop, I've got no idea. But they become the shopkeepers down there, and they started a huge family, gigs. And then they had to move across the road when the other, where Howard lives now, and they occupied that for a while. But wonderful family, and you learn their history. So they became part of the pa. And we used to go to the Lyric Theatre because of them every Sunday to watch the Indian movies. In those days we call them the Hindu movies, but I don't think that's quite PC these days. So we watched the Indian movies. So that would have been the start of Bollywood that we saw, because those were the sorts of movies that they had. Everybody was dancing, the saris were beautiful, the gold jewellery that they were. They were absolutely beautiful, so we couldn't understand a word of what they said, but we could hum along to the tunes, and we loved dancing. So we'd come back and walk home and do the dances as we all came home, swirling around, although we didn't have nice dresses like them, but we imagined that we did. So introduced us into their culture, and we went to 2 weddings. When Kanta and Lakshmi both got married, so we went to both of those weddings as well, and that was totally different to our way of accepting weddings. Absolutely beautiful. And then going from there, we had Ray Loughley, who was a very, very quiet person, very retiring person, and Ray Loughley had a huge fence around his place because he used to grow exotic fruit. So he had bananas in there, and he had mandarins, he had everything that you only bought in the shop. And to keep us out, he had this fence, but he had the most beautiful bath in there as well. And that's where Tiro was born. Tiro and Mutu Loughley? Yeah. So that's where they were born. That's where they're from. And I can remember Tiro telling me that her mother died very young, and she said, I overnight became the slave. And she was only a young girl. She said, as a young girl, she had to provide the kai. She had to fit into her mother's shoes. And she married Yurik. I think he was a refugee from Czechoslovakia. And so started their family, the Rakochis. But anyway, that was Uncle Ray. And he never spoke to us much. We never spoke to him. We never went anywhere near his place unless we could hitch each other up to reach over the fence to pinch whatever our hands could grab. And then along from there was the Ngāwha area, so that's where there are 3 baths there now, but in those days there were no baths in that area there. The baths were on Lovey Williams' property, and Lovey and Sine lived there, Sine, and they had Possum, and I think her name is Rita, so we still call her Possum to this day. Possum's moved back there. And so she occupies the house, and she was a little white house that was in that movie here a little while ago that created a lot of controversy.
The one that violence.
Yeah.
Sorry, but
So, yeah, I didn't even think I'd get this far. Anyway, so Possum lived there, then next door, and she still lives there. Next door to Possum was Auntie Bessie Hayward. And I never knew her husband. She was a widow when I was a child, and she lived there, and as she aged, her eyesight got worse. And Natasha's given me a photo this morning. Where did I put it, Natasha? No, not that one. A photo of 4 women that she's printed for me, and those 4 women, it's probably in my bag. The 4 women I was Maxine, Auntie Moira, Helen, and Baby. Baby is Inez Kingy, but she was Baby Hayward to us. We still call her Baby Hayward. And so those 4 women were born to Auntie Bessie, plus a whole lot of men. Iris's dad, all of the Hayward men who went off to the war, all the brothers, they belonged to Auntie Bessie. She was a moko nui ārani, so she was quite high up in the rangitihi line, Ngāti Rangitihi. So we had a moko nui ārani, a couple of them buried down in the church in the early days. I think those were her parents. Anyway, Auntie Bessie was a very astute, elegant woman, quite fair, but she always had her white hair pulled to the back. And Baby and Bishop moved in there while she was still alive, because they moved in there to look after her. So she lived in the new house that Baby and them built there, Baby and Bishop, Inez and Bishop, and Guy lives there now, Guy Kingy with his wife Wena Tate. So that's where they live now. And Auntie Bessie had the most beautiful plum tree as well. It was an early plum that was red and yellow, and yet we had yellow flesh inside, but just little ones. And we thought we could sneak there because he said, no, the blind lady won't see us. But she knew, and she'd call out from her house, get away from that tree, you kids. But she was a lovely old lady, and I've learned a lot more about her and her life since I've got older. And of course she produced these wonderful children. I was just telling Natasha that Maxine, who my sister was named after, Maxine was the first Māori lady to enter university. So, and then of course we had Inez, Helen Mansfield married a man here, Earl Mansfield. What did he do? He had some business. And then Moira Rolliston, Jeff's whānau. Moira was my godmother, and she moved over with her husband to the farm in the Kaimais. And I can remember when I was pregnant with my first child, and Mum and Auntie Mary took me over there because they kept company, they kept connections. We went over there, and I said, "Well, do you think I should go? I'm happy." And they said, Yeah, you're far away from your time, and anyway, we've got knitting needles. What does that mean? Anyway, we went over, and I spent a lot of time with Moira as I grew up. She wanted me to move into her house at Kete. No hot water, no nothing, just a cold tap at the back. And she said, "Josie, you move into this house out here, you and your husband." I said, "No way. I've got to have electricity. I've got to have hot water." But you see, that's where they lived. That's where they brought up their children. It was not a hardship for them. Same with Gekko's house, only had a cold tap at the back. And that was life then. But we had a zip, and we had electricity, and we had all the mod cons, as we thought, and 2 toilets, even though only one of them worked. But and then coming from there, we can jump across the road. Oh no, above her was Lammy Morrison.
Somebody asked me before
Yep.
we started.
Down below.
Yeah.
We haven't got there yet. I'm on my way down. I better hurry up. So above there was Uncle Lammy Morrison and Hikatangi. So that's Kahita's grandparents, Kahita McRae. So Kahita was a nil child. I didn't know this until she told me years later. And she used to watch us. They had a big veranda full of windows around their place, and she'd sit up there recuperating from whatever illness she was suffering and watch us playing down the pa. And longing to be down there and playing with us. But Lala and her mother and Ben lived on the other side of Tunahuku, where Tupuora is now. So that's their house. But to look after Lala, they would take her to Hikatangi's, and she'd spend her time with her queer up there. So she spent a lot of time there. So across the road down in front of there, we had Ngahuia's house, Ngahuia Rana, and that's where Mickey Rana was born, and Polly Purini, we called her. You see, that's what I mean. Those are the names. Purini lived there with Mickey Rana. Mickey Rana was a talented musician without one lesson. He could play any instrument that was put in front of him. And he was a blessing to grow up with, because we always had music no matter what. Even if he had a comb or a piece of paper or a blade of grass, he was the musician with whatever we wanted to sing. And then next to Ngā Huia was another little whare, and that was Hutuha. Hutuha lived in there. I can't remember his surname. And Dando was Hapimana. Hutuha Hapimana. And he was a little short man, but he worked around the pā with my father and the other old men, maintaining the pā. So those guys worked hard to keep the pā tidy and safe. And they did it all. Now we can't find anybody to do anything. We've got to get contractors in. And anyway, so Hutuha lived there, and his son Dando. I don't know what's happened to Dando, but I think he went off to university. Then next to that we had little Tiki. And that's where the Mackay and the Enia family occupied. The Enia through marriage, but the Mackay stronghold. And Lorraine still lives there, from that heritage. She lives not in the whare. It's still got a dirt floor. But that whare used to be a refuge for who was running Te Koti, because they started the Ringetu. They were with the Ringetu faith. So even though the government was chasing Te Koti around, he would come and take refuge into little Tiki and have little Ringetu services. So that family's still the same. They still are Ringetu, and they've got another little papakainga up on Ferry Springs Road, and that's called Te Kuri. So they've got a little place up there, same family. So they moved from one area to the other. Am I going over time, Ben? I'm just wondering if perhaps I have to... Anyway, let me get down to Tunahopu, and then I'll be finished. I haven't covered everything that I wanted to cover, but that's for another day.
Next year.
Yeah. I'm just talking about the people in the houses, because I want to remember them, and I want you to hear how the families are connected to those people who were originally in those homes. So then we had the Mackay stronghold with little Tiki, and lived there was quite a big family, but they were transient because they moved out to Ferry Springs and back, and they were also attached to Waikuta. So they had other marae that they went to. But I grew up with a young girl, Penny. Penny is the same age as me, and her young brother Johnny. And that's where Rangitahi used to live there. Maywhara was the Mayflower. She was the midwife for the village. So everybody who was going to have children prior to when we built the hospital, Maywhara would go to help before we had the maternity. And then there was an old queer there who was totally blind. So she was a seer. So she was a tuhunga. And that's why we kept away from that area. But in front of them was a rangi haupapa bath. And that's still there today. So that family still uses the rangi haupapa bath. And I haven't been in there for years. But that's where they still bathe, that family still bathes. And of course we're coming back up the other side to the lime bath. And we call it the lime bath with an N. But over the years I've heard it termed as the lime bath with an M. Or the lion bath. But in Maida, we only ever call it the lion bath. And that was the big communal bath down there that everybody used if they weren't using a Tanefa bath or the Rangi Haupapa bath. And this is just in our immediate area. There are baths just further down on the other side of Tunahopu. We had the corner baths, and there were 2 baths down there. However, the lion bath was where I spent a lot of my youth. We all did. That's where the men went when they went for morihana on the Sundays, and they would come back to the bath with their catch, and they would sit in the bath and scale the morihana.
How morihana is?
Calf. Yeah, and it's something I could never stomach, but Maxine still loves it. If she can get hold of a morihana today, she'd be licking your hand. Well, it's called Morrison Bay. I don't know. Ben would know why. Yeah, but
it's named after the Morrison.
Yeah.
The old fellow Morrison.
Yeah, so they went every Sunday, and Willie went one Sunday and came back, and he and Ian Barrett. And they got into the cold lake, into the bath, and Willie said, we won't be having any more children from now on because that lake is so cold, I think I've done damage to myself. But they went once, and that's what I mean. If you were around there, you were invited to go and do these things. But they came and they took the scales, or they descaled the fish while they were sitting in the bath. But then you would just throw the bath over it, and it would go down the trap hole. They would gut them there, all down the trap hole. So, sorry, Lake Rotorua, that's what you got. But you see, those are the things that feed the fish. And all natural stuff. And they used to get the lungs out for us, and we used to pop them. So that was something. We would be in the bath watching the men do that, and they'd throw those to us, the lungs to us, so that we could pop them. And it would loved it. Yeah. So, and then next to the bath, of course, was the washing pool. So if you were in a hurry some days and you came running down to the big bath and it wasn't in or was over full, you could fill the washing pool with hot water in no time at all, because they ran off the same pipe. So we had plenty of hot water, plenty of bathing. I couldn't believe going to school with Dr. Edwards' children, like David and all those boys, the rough and ready boys, Stuart, and they still had grass stains on their knees. Don't you fellas have a bath? We couldn't believe it. They said we didn't have time. We said, you should come down the park and have a bath with us. We were spotlessly clean because we didn't have one bath a day. We just went down the bath and just jumped in when it was in. That's what we were like. We swam in the Rapeka and came back to the bath to get hot. Then we run back to the Rapeka and come back to the bath to get hot. If we swam in the lake, we would go to the tani for bath. So, you know, that's how we spent our weekends and our days, doing all of these wonderful things together. Having Shanghai fights, having kapahaka, kapahaka.
About the way the mothers called the children home.
Where am I to the lion bath? Okay, so when we'd all have our baths straight after school, or we'd go home and have our wheat bix, because those were after school snacks, not lovely snacks like what they have now. We'd have a wheat bix, either buttered or condensed milk, put over the top, take our wheat bix, they would recharge us and then we were out again. And then we would be, we'd go and have our bath, and then called in, and no, we'd have our tea first. But to have our tea, all the mothers would stand at the front of the house and whistle, so that we all knew our whistle, and we'd all get up, all run. We'd just drop whatever we were doing to get home to have kai. Yeah, and we were tuned into that whistle. Even if you were further down the path, it would echo, and so you'd know to go home. So they had to feed us before the men came out of the Lake House Hotel at 6 o'clock, because the men had their own dining, and the wife would sit and eat with the men, but the children had to be fed and out of the road. So we'd eat our kai. If we had koura for tea, we would take all the claws and everything and either sit in the park by the swings and finish off the claws there, or out in front of Tama on the warm steps, because the steps on Tama were warm. So we spent many hours just lying on the warm steps while Tony Bass told us ghost stories, gigs? And we believed every one of them. Like how these people came out of that grave over there. Oh no, don't go near that grave. And we believed him. But he entertained us over all those years with his fairy tales. But we'd lie out there until we knew that it was time to go and have a bath, come back home in our pyjamas, and then we'd have to wait till 7:30 when the God Save the King or God Save the Queen came on the radio, and we had to run into Pop's bedroom. He was lying back in bed ready to go to sleep, and we had to go like this. All the way through God Save the King, God Save the Queen. And then we'd finish, and then we just went straight to bed. We were all asleep just after 7:30, a whole lot of us. And that we were regimented down there. You know, it wasn't going out after dark. That's why the St. Faith's Youth Club was so exciting, because they used to have dances at 8 o'clock. You know, so it wasn't bedtime at 7:30. We could go to the dances on a Sunday. Yeah, so life was good. And then, so where are we up to? At Limebath. Next door to that was Jimmy Loffley and Polly Loffley. So more of your whānau from Ngāpuana, your connection from Ngāpuana, and that's where Ngāhuia, Jimmy was Ngāhuia's father. And Jimmy lived there in his own little whare, but Polly lived, when I was a child, I don't know what happened, but Polly lived in a little room outside, close to the bath, and she brought Frankie up. So that was Gugu's eldest, now what was Gugu's name? Starts with an H. Anyway, so Polly and Frankie lived in there, and Frankie is Hoki's wife. Hoki Kahukiwa's wife. So Frankie was born in the park, and they lived in one room. And, you know, I can't believe that they had a table in there for their kai and a bed. And they slept in there, and I used to love going in there because Auntie Polly would give you whatever she could when you came in there with Frankie, and you just have to walk in the doorway and you were in the house. You were in the only bit of space that was there, but she lined and wallpapered her house with the Pink Woman's Weekly covers, you know, the weekly news. And we used to love going in there and seeing the weekly news, and I used to think, oh, what lovely wallpaper. But she probably had to put that up there to stop the breeze coming in through the planks that the house was built out of. And her oven, her stove, was an open stove. It was an open fire that was outside, but the fire was inside. So you know how they managed to live like that as well, because we didn't have health and safety in those days. And then Ray lived in the next whare, and Ray, he was Ngāhuia's father, but ahead of him was Gugu and Maya Ross. So you know Maya from moving out to Waka, and Jimmy still lives down in that property as well. And that house had many people occupying it. So Tito lived in there for a time with Yurik Rakochi, and then Bill Weber and Gugu lived in there as well. So there are a lot of people who lived in that little whare. Then next door to them was another whare that Maya moved into, and that belonged to Auntie Eva, Anuru Te Amo's mother. So that house is still there, but nobody's using it now. And although it belonged to Auntie Eva, she let Maya live in there, and they had 8 children in there until they were rehoused out at Sala Street. So Maya Ross lived there, but Jimmy lives down there now. Then next door to that is where young Howard Morrison lives, and that, when I was a child, was occupied by a karaua called Wee Martin, and his wife was Auntie Muri. And so they lived there, and he had a horse in the back. How the devil he could fit stables in the back with a horse, and they had every animal you could think of lived there behind Korowai's house. And a lovely, lovely couple. He was a very erect, strong man, you know, from his horse riding. And I don't know whatever happened to them or how they even got there, but Kuia Muri used to spend most of her day in the bath. So if we came down to the bath and she was in there, she would bring out her big long comb. Remember those big combs that they used in the old days? And one of us would have to sit behind her and comb her hair. And then we'd plait it up, and then she'd unplait it and tell the next kid to come and do the same thing. But she was a gorgeous woman. They were gorgeous people, you know, and they embraced me. And they embraced all the kids of my age in the park, which is why I wanted to bring them back to memory, because you wouldn't even know that they'd been there. And then after them, I think, came the Webbers, and that was an unholy family. Tommy Webber and Auntie Polly, and just a name now, but I found out later that Tommy was the son of the headmaster of the primary school. So, and I think, oh, whatever. And then, because Kuia Wiki lived down there where Tangi moved into, by the Taniwha barn. And then the Webbers were there, and then who else came in after them? I think Nara and some of your relations, Nara and Mari and Morrison. And then, then Rachel moved across there before Nara and Mari, because they had so many Indian babies that they moved across there as well, until they bought their shop in Koedo. So they moved to Koedo, and then Mari and Nara moved in there then, and young Howard lives there now, Howard and Y. So they lived there. Next door was the Mitchell property, Uncle Zed and Auntie Natalia. They lived on the corner there, right opposite Tama, right opposite where I was born. And they lived there, and they rebuilt the house that's now been rebuilt again by Ryu and Don McDonald. So Bunsi and Ricky moved into the house at one time when they first got married. So they started their married life down there as well. So a lot of home starts happened down in Ōhinemutu. You know, they married and they could move into a property before they fell on their feet and could purchase a house somewhere else. So lots of, I think Ricky Boy was born. He was born there. And then next to, opposite that was Whakatūria, the wharekai. And the Whakatūria was a wonderful place. You can see, you might want to turn the...
Hang on, I've gone the wrong way.
And that's Whakatūria there. So why I've got this picture on this side. So that's the front of it. And that just seats were there wasn't a doorway, it was like an L shape. And when I saw this photo, I thought, well, that was what I saw every time I got up in the morning. That faced Tama, that view faced Tama, and that's what I saw as soon as I walked out the front steps. But all of these old kuia I grew up under, you know, wonderful people. That's where Queen Victoria stood when I knew her, and she's moved across over here where Whakatūria used to be. But Bunsi and Ricky were supposed to have their hakari for their marriage in Whakatūria, and it got burned down. It burned down, so they had to change their plans for where they had their wedding breakfast. But so that was 1964, because I was in Australia there. Then I missed their wedding. But this was the view, and you know, these were the people that nurtured me. And all wonderful people. They didn't get around like this, of course. They wore English clothes and everything else, and had jobs and had mokopuna around them. But just so wonderful for me to see their faces. And Auntie Rangi Pinninga there, look, she smiled like that all her life. That's Tuatini's grandmother. So all of those wonderful, wonderful Auntie Makarita down here. Yeah, great people. So as soon as I saw that photo, I said, that's enough. I only need a plan of Ōhinemutu plus this.
I have a photo at home when Queen Victoria was gifted. Mum was 8 years old. I got it at home and she was in her school uniform when Queen Victoria was given to the people.
Yeah, and right next to right next to Queen Victoria, of course, was the house that Queen Bella Simeon lived in, and that became the carving shop that Kimahakaraia had there. But you know, this is a wonderful, wonderful photo. But Whakatūria was the place that they celebrated the return of the boys from the Second World War. I don't know about the First World War, because I don't know how old it was. But they had the fortnights there, because the women would raise money to help maintain the park for everything else that was happening down there. So they had what they called the fortnights. So every family had a fortnight that you had to be there over the weekend to provide food for the tama dancers. So these families were very famous. You know, we knew when Auntie Rangi was down there because she made the best fish and chips. And you know, all of these sorts of things. We knew what they would produce, and there was a competition against, you know, with the families. And they sold the CAC Clark drinks, so that was usually our job. They'd say, come across and you can sell the drinks. And wonderful, wonderful years, and they put a lot of time and raised a lot of money for Ōhinemutu in those days, all voluntary. But when the families came up for the fortnight on the Fridays, some would come on a Thursday, prepare their kai and get everything ready, then the Friday night dance, the Saturday night dance, and their families would live in the little side room. So yeah, so we were talking about Pinto yesterday, so that's where I got to know Pinto Mahima, because he would come up here with his kuia. And when it was their fortnight, he spent his time, up there at the fortnight. But wonderful, it was a busy place, very busy place. It's not like it's quiet, it was never quiet, but it was a very, very popular place. And of course, tourists could always come in, and you could drive right in and park out in front of Tama, in front of the Mitchell house, Sid Mitchell's house that became Hanu's souvenir shop, and that's where Banani worked. And they could drive right up there. So no wonder there's no earth there anymore to hold the weight of the traffic. Yeah, and we're having problems down at Ōhinemutu at the moment with the geothermal coming up through the roads and the cobblestones and everything else like that. But yeah, it's full access. You can drive right through in front of the church, right through to Kotu. You know, down to Taurua Road, to the main road, right through to Tunahopu. So it's a nuisance to me that I've got to go all the way around now to the lake house to go down if I'm driving. That's why it's easier just for me to walk across Tama and straight to Tunahopu. But a lot of cars going through there, a lot of police chasers going through there after cars, people who shouldn't have had cars. But that's we used to always park the St. Bates bus when we went away on tours, and I haven't even got to that. Oh, good.
I think what we must do,
When was Tom's house built? Tom?
Oh, Ann could answer that, the
I think
vicarage.
what we're going to have to do, because I've got a car with a meter, that you have to come back and do some more, Josie.
Look, I apologise for talking so long.
No, it's wonderful. It's just wonderful. And we don't want to gloss over all the other fantastic things as well. So I think in many ways we should just call this the first episode, and we'll
To be continued.
to be continued. What do you guys think? What do you guys think? Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
It's just too much. It's just wonderful, Josie. It is just this lovely details of life, and that was what so much I wanted to hear about.
Yeah. As I say, the recall of the families, because they're important to me, but they might be as important to other people. But you know, it's good to have their names said and recorded.
Eddie, what were you going to say?
She has deliberately kept behind that she has a wonderful singing voice that we used to hear
Yes,
when she
exactly. She does. Absolutely.
It's not
So
about
I'm
me.
just hoping she's going to prove me absolutely right.
I doubt it.
She does it.
I haven't sung a solo for many years. Come down to the next tangi.
She used to get up and sing quite a bit around it.
At the sound show, yeah.
She's got a wonderful voice.
Well, that was
still.
Penny Hucker that you know, toned our voices up because that's how we earned money. We were never poor down there as kids. We just, if we wanted money, we'd jump on the cars that were coming in the park and what a Penny Hucker. The buses used to come on there, and before they could even get out of the bus, we'd jump in the aisle and we'd sing and then just put our hands out and they'd give us pennies and threepences and whatever it was. So we were never broke. You know, we used to buy our lunches at school sometimes because we had enough money. So we were independent of our parents, you know, but still enjoying our lives.
Josie, was that Rotorua Primary?
Yep. We went to Rotorua Primary, and the Catholic children, because we were mixed there, as you well know, they went to St. Michael's, but we all walked to school together, and they were in uniform, and we didn't have to wear a uniform at the Rotorua Primary School in those days. And then we used to call them Catholic dogs, and they called us primary frogs. Remember that, Carol? The Catholic dogs, and we were primary frogs. But if we walked out of the park together, they got on their bus at the primary school, and then when we left school, their bus would arrive, and we'd walk back into the park together and just go about playing our lives away and enjoying each day as it came. Adventures galore.
It's wonderful, Josie. Absolutely wonderful. Really, really, really.
Got to finish with Mr. Sandman.
Oh, I can't remember the
Do you still remember the distinctive whistle that your queen
Yeah, but I don't know if I can whistle. Yeah, I don't whistle anymore. I used to whistle all the time. When I met Willie, I'd whistle. And when I started my first job at the Mighty Affairs, and I was just naturally whistling a tune, and Tex Doyle, I remember he popped up. Who bought the canary? I was horrified. Here I was trying to make a great impression, starting a new job, and this living next door. You know, he had a guitar and used to entertain. I said, well, I think I stopped whistling from that day on. Oh, Margie Morrison lived behind us when we were in Fenton Park, and she said, I always know when Josie's hanging up her washing in the morning because you can hear her whistling. But yeah, no, I know the whistle, but I can't produce it anymore.
Your mouth changes, I'm the same, right?
Yeah, I used to whistle all the time. My grandsons used to be rapped. I'd say, whistle, Nanny. How do you do it?